Welcome, I'm Hernan Murdoch. In this episode, we're going to take a closer look at the impact that data analytics carries and also the challenges in implementing this very powerful technology. To help us better understand the dynamics around data analytics and the impact it carries and how we can better maximize that, we have with us Kathleen Crawford, who will help us better understand these dynamics and how we can use it to our advantage. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hey, Hernan.
What are some of the things about the impact that we need to keep in mind? Because definitely it sounds to me like it has a lot of potential here to help us tremendously with our work.
Yes, I agree. There is enormous potential here. We have a great potential not only for ourselves as auditors to be more efficient using these tools and techniques, but in the long run, businesses' efficiency is improved as well because, as we said at the top of this episode, we're looking at everything related to whatever this aspect is. So we're not limited to a statistical or a non-statistical sample and having to make inferences. We're looking at the whole thing. So increased efficiency, better results. It's very, very interesting how much more faith people will place in the results and the recommendations from audit when they know that we're looking at 100% of the available data on whatever aspect of the area or process or system we're investigating. Another thing is that our planning as auditors can be more focused. And this can be a benefit in terms of sometimes shortening some of our audits. You know, as we get more mature in this process as an audit group, then our planning going forward is going to be that much more focused because we will know where the data resides and how we're going to use it. Mm-hmm. Wider coverage. So we can go in narrow, but we can also do a year's worth of audits in a wider way. We can look at many, many more things because we have great faith, and so does our stakeholder group, in what we have said about data that we've evaluated before, and now we can start doing more of that. I already alluded to this ability to look at whole populations. That is a big, big benefit, and it can sometimes be transformational for a group that we're auditing in terms of learning things that were hidden. That's why we use that term, knowledge discovery in databases. There's hidden information. We know it's there, but we just don't know what it is or exactly where it is. And this process helps us get at that. Here's one that I love, increased credibility. I mean, I think we can stand and walk with a little bit of swagger because we know that we have a lock on getting our clients better information about how things are actually running because of this type of work.
I agree. I like that as well, because I think that it's one of the challenges we encounter quite often is that the question will be then raised when we highlight an issue and they say, well, how do you know that? Mm-hmm. And how pervasive is it? And recall that when we're documenting findings, we have that E for effect. So how big a problem is it? So what? If you need to extrapolate, if you're trying to convey the fact that what you saw in a small sample is important, it may be a little bit more difficult to do than if you were to go back to management with results and say, well, we looked at 750,000 records and this is what's happening. So it just raises that level of credibility to such a high point where it's very difficult to argue against it. One other thing that I think is fantastic about data analytics is that there are certain procedures that if you do it by hand, and organizations are increasingly getting rid of paper and those manual processes, but there's still a lot of those in many organizations. By going by document, register by register, and so on, it may take longer in some cases than doing an analytic procedure that just has a system run through hundreds of thousands of records. It may take you as long or even less time. And I've done some work where you're comparing certain days to look to see whether or not something is happening or something happens before something else, like when the requisition and the PO are created after the invoice is issued and the merchandise has already arrived. Well, the three-way match is not going to work very well. Right. And the whole process of getting approvals for purchases if the purchases are happening before the approval is obtained. So looking at those dates and the comparison, that's a very simple procedure. So if you were to do it by hand over, let's say, a sample of 30 transactions or 50 transactions one by one, you can do that in a matter of seconds. So
Yes.
there are certain things that actually can do faster by looking at the entire population, leveraging the power of data analytics. But
Yes.
as we're talking about this, I'm also wondering, well, there are a lot of positives for sure, but
Yes.
there may be some negatives, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm afraid there are. There are challenges. So I prefer to call them challenges. They're not
Okay.
insurmountable, but there are some challenges with data analytics. Access is probably the first one that that folks think about. Is what is audits access to data? Many times, as you were talking about, different systems may have pieces of the information that we require, so access to the data in different places can be a challenge. And not for nothing, it can also be a challenge to persuade the gatekeepers of that data that we are really, not only that we're empowered to look at it, but that we have the proficiency to work with it. So we have to be mindful of where data is, but we also have to be mindful of the way in which we have to persuade people that we know what we're doing. We have a group of folks who are very, very adept at this. Time, which I alluded to on a previous graphic, the time to get the data, this is a big, big challenge. So for most of us, I think, who are working in this space, we're looking ahead for upcoming audits that are coming at us in terms of the schedule, and getting ahead of the curve, so to speak, in getting that data and starting to work with it long before we're going to do anything with it. That is a challenge, and so we need to have ways to overcome that challenge. There definitely is training and cost and time associated with that training. This is not in everybody's wheelhouse naturally, so it's important that we recognize that teaching people how to do this and having appropriate technology, more user-friendly technology, and technology around data analytics is getting better and better year over year. It's become much more user-friendly than it was even 5 years ago. So I would say that the cost and the time are going down, but there's still a bit of a bump. There's a bit of an impediment here. And I think some of this is about creativity, too. Are people being creative in their ideas about what they're going to do with this data or what they could do with this data? Are they limiting their imaginations? And training can help expand one's imagination about what is possible.
That's another argument for having a skills inventory within the organization and also looking in terms of individual interests. So some people will have a natural inclination for it, and that's one thing to keep in mind. Some people may want to develop skills in that space, and then we need to also think in terms of the timeline and the costs and resources available. But if we put all of those things together, we can identify who are going to be the ones who are going to invest in that, or if the whole department is going to be equally trained on it. And that's a strategic decision that needs to be made as well. One of the challenges that I've seen many organizations have to experience and navigate and resolve is that they train, but then they don't put it in practice soon enough. So then people forget what they learned in the training
Yes.
and they don't use it. And that's, again, another important aspect of this is making sure that once trained, it becomes part of the standard practice going forward so they can continue to use those skills and grow those skills or develop those skills and not let it fade away. So very important there as well. What are some other challenges that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, your last point is another reason for looking ahead. You know, if we're going through training and we're thinking about, we're learning something, we want to give people opportunities to use that knowledge right away. So let's look ahead to something that's coming at us instead of waiting for it to arrive, because you're right, the skill gets stale unless we use it.
Right.
So a few other things to think about. How do we decide which indicators to analyze? As you well appreciate, Hernan, there are lots and lots of data points out there, constellation of stars that we could look at, and deciding which indicators are important is another sound argument for looking ahead. What are we worried or what are we concerned about in an area, process, or system that we have yet to audit? And how can we identify those indicators? It means that we're going to have a foundation. This is not in a vacuum, I should say, because we're still incorporating this practice into our greater knowledge base of how things work within our organization. So the indicators should be clear based on organizational data and procedures and policies and other things. Managing volumes of data is a challenge. So do we have tools that can handle the fire hose opening up in terms of coming at us? But that goes back to my point about the technology is getting more and more user-friendly. So the time of training, the cost of training, and the abilities of our systems to work with that information is getting better and better. Gaining proficiency, this is what you spoke to just a minute ago. We gain the proficiency, we don't want to lose the proficiency. So let's maintain auditor knowledge of how to do these things by giving plenty of opportunity and making it an expectation that we've used all this time and cost of training. Let's make sure we get our bang for the buck. Formatting of reports can be a bit challenging. So especially if information is coming from different places. So if we're using multiple databases, getting a report together that tells a story that we would like to tell can be a bit of a challenge. But there, again, this is where technology is improving. And I won't mention particular software, but there are lots of really great software packages out there that help us with data visualization. And some of them do the data mining and the visualization. So shop for tools that work for what you have in mind in terms of your objectives. And standardizing data from multiple systems, similar to the point that I was making about volumes of data, pulling it in from different places takes a little bit of work. And as you had also indicated, that formatting of dates around the world can be quite different, but there are also other types of codes that could be different from region to region. And these are things to be mindful of. And finally, funding. The cost of this technology is still expensive, but it's not as expensive as it was when this first came on the market. So we have to look at funding from a few different respects. It's not only the software, but it's also the personnel, the training. We want people on our teams who are proficient at this, and that proficiency is an extra skill that is probably going to elevate somebody's salary because they have this capacity, and we want to be able to use their skills.
Excellent points. Yes. And as we think in terms of the funding or the costs associated with some of these things, whether it's getting the hardware, the software, the training, and so on, remember also that this is going to be for the service of the organization. Mm-hmm. So as you're thinking about budgets, I encourage internal audit units to also think in terms of how they can share some of those costs, because once we learn the techniques, we can also leverage those knowledge points to help the organization at large. As we develop scripts and other ways of monitoring for anomalies and outliers and questionable transactions, those techniques can also be shared with other units that also need to know, whether it's the operating unit or second line units, maybe the compliance department, mm-hmm. or quality control, security, and so on. So we can also argue that some of these costs should not be borne only by the internal audit department, but rather it's a corporate cost, and we can fraction it off somehow. That may also make it more affordable. So thank you very much, because yes, data analytics is definitely a trend that's been going on for a while, yes, and will continue going forward. And we need to understand it, and we need to also know how to use it, understand the benefits, understand the challenges, and how we can overcome some of those. So thank you very much for your help with this topic today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
If you like this series, subscribe to the ACI Learning YouTube channel to enjoy more audit-related content.